1.34.2 has been out for quite a while now, a couple days, so we've all had our time to get our hands into it, look at the features, look at the update, look at what they've done to the game. And from how the reviews have been looking so far, is it safe to conclude that Paradox has finally made a good update to EU4, a good DLC? Well, the short answer to that is mostly, I guess. For the vast majority of things promised and for the product delivered, this is certainly a large step up to their previous offerings in terms of just functionality of the game and many other things. But at the risk of being too critical, I feel like a lot of Paradox's success, as it were, can be attributed to a very interesting strategy, which I think is best described from Roderick from the Wimpy Kid, Diary of the Wimpy Kid series. For those unfamiliar with that series, that series explores a concept, which is setting your expectations so pathetically low that doing the bare minimum, like getting your dirty underwear off the kitchen table, is regarded as something deserving of high praise. And while this update, I think, does go beyond the bare minimum, and that I will concede, I feel like a lot of its praise originates from quite low expectations. And while I have to admit there are quite a few actually good things about the update, there are many issues that have been reintroduced that are going to definitely need a couple patches. In fairness, I will reserve my criticism in regards... Well, I will reserve some criticism, because I don't think those issues are too major. They can be ironed out in 1 or 2 patches. It's mostly some modifiers being way too broken, like a 50% national tax from a government reform. I mean, we know tax is a joke anyway, but come on, guys. To things giving base dev cost, mod cost, which is really strong and really not a model I should be handing out. And again, things like the Scandinavian +1 building slots available, taking Scandinavia from arguably one of the most useless formables to among the top tiers from that alone. Anyway, I think that's enough of the staring at the screen and talking. Let's take a look at some examples, and I think we're not good to start, but from the good. So, let's start with that. The good. Before we get into the meat of the video, I think it's important to set out some baselines into how we're going to be looking at some of the new content. There is a way to approach some of the new content from a person who plays EU4 on a more casual basis, and I would like to reiterate here that I don't say this as an insult. People have fun with the game as how they wish. Now, I personally am an MVP player, so I would have a bias towards things that help the competitive scene, to which, in fairness, there are things here as well. Before we get into the meat of the video, I think it's important to lay down some groundwork and distinctions. There are certain different ways of playing this game. I personally played this game from a multiplayer perspective, or as a person who likes to push this game to its limits, building the strongest countries, getting number as high as possible, like with a discipline or goods produced counter, or economy counter, doing one faiths, doing world conquest, that kind of stuff, and of course certainly a lot of multiplayer. Now, this is a way to play the game, but it's not the only way to play the game, and furthermore, that's not the way the majority of people play this game. And one thing that I would like to say as a baseline is that a lot of my criticism towards this update actually comes from how absolutely broken and how absolutely powerful some features are. Not if they are inherently used in isolation, but if they are necessarily abused by a player who's doing something like this. This gives these quote-unquote exploits / unintended behaviors a much higher skill ceiling, sure, but the fact that they exist in the first place is what kind of raises the concern for me, because they will be exploited and they will be used in multiplayer games to devastating effect. Regardless, we are here to talk about the good part of the thing, and a part of the update, as it were. And with that, I think there's no better way to say that one of the things that I really appreciate this update is they have, again, acknowledged both the multiplayer and the competitive scene, again, with this update. There have been numerous references in the dev diaries referring to things like, okay, we know quantity econ quality is way too strong in the current meta. How can we address this? How do we address the dev meta? And so I have to, right off the bat, say that at least the intent is there. The execution, we'll get to that in another section of the video, but the intent is there, and for that we'll appreciate it. And for that I will say credit where credit is due. There is a good, and I do genuinely mean this, a good nerf to quantity economic. And the reason I say good is I don't actually think this kills it. Normally, when something is very strong, developers like to overzealously burn it to the ground. I don't think that's what they did with Quantity Economic, and I think Quantity Economic actually still has a place if you want to have a large, cheap army, which actually makes a lot of sense if you're going Quantity Economic from a thematic point of view. See, the Quantity Economic finisher used to provide land force limit and dev cost. It continues to provide land force limit at a 10%, which is still not bad. It wasn't great compared to the 50, but now with the finisher brought down to 25, it's a lot more comparable. But instead of giving another minus 10% dev cost, it now provides minus 5% land maintenance modifier, which is quite strong, because if you're going Quantity Economic, you're already getting minus some regiment cost here, but you're already getting minus 5% land maintenance modifier from your 6 Quantity idea, and you're getting it from your 6 Economic idea. So with that in the policy, you're already running 15% land maintenance modifier cost reduction. You can then combine that with a minus 10% land for cost general, which advisor, which I just don't have here, to get quite a powerful 1/4 off your entire army. Given that in multiplayer, your army expenses, let's just say 90% of some people's economic spending, that is quite powerful and it's nothing to be scoffed at. However, it's certainly a very direct nerf to the dev met, especially if you take a look at Economic Ideas Finish, now only giving 10% dev cost, which granted is a lot more in line with some of the previous policies here. And I think getting quantity away from the plus 50s down to plus 25 is genuinely a good change, something I have to commend Paradox for. And now we get to the meat of the update that most people will agree with. These missions are fun. They are extensive, they're a large mission tree. I won't say they are necessarily Anbenar inspired, but it definitely feels like something you'd see more in Anbenar, which is a mod notoriously known for having good and extensive missions, compared to the Paradox usual offering. If we were just to compare this to, say, the Mamluk missions, which I guess is an unfair comparison, it's night and day. The Mamluks, for a country that starts, at the end of the day, as the second great power, contains a total of, 3 unique missions? Absolutely amazing for the second great power at the start of the game, because these two are, I don't know if they're unique, I think they are Arabia specific. So they have 2 regional missions, the default missions, and 3 Mamluk-specific missions. That is honestly rather sad, and it's more of a testament to how the Middle East desperately needs another update. Almost like they had a DLC, but they're going to need to do another one. Regardless, I see that neither are there. We're talking about the good part of the update. And for that I will say, the Polish missions, the Swedish missions, the Norwegian missions, even the Gotland and Danish missions, they deliver. Livonian, Teutons, and Lithuania, and Riga also saw quite a bit of love, and it's love they deserve. The Teutons are actually not just an alternative way of forming Prussia now, and I think I definitely have to commend them for that. They genuinely have done a good job on the missions. As for the modifiers from the missions, well, that is going to be for the second part of the video. And I think I have to make a commendation here, and this is more of a general shift in Paradox policy, as it were, but I quite like how they are no longer adding new mechanics into the DLCs, and mostly focusing on things like flavor / missions and so on, and leaving things like the AI improvements and combat improvements to part of the free update. This, I think, helps them as well, since it allows them to balance those features later, because if you add a mechanics through a DLC, it's very difficult to justify an update for a DLC that arguably a bit of your audience does not possess. Meanwhile, if it's in a base game, you can continue to tweak with these features and use them continuously to great effect. I think this is a very good step in the right direction for an expansion pack. For people that are going to buy every DLC anyway, like MP hosts, they're still going to buy it. But it does mean that if you don't have your paycheck by the end of the month, as it were, you're not going to be playing a game without major mechanics that you got used to from the dev diary and everyone else is using, because you couldn't afford the DLC this month. So in that regard, I think this is a very good step in the right direction. A lot of people are still going to buy these DLCs, especially if they continue to deliver in the content they offer regarding the missions, because people like missions, people like content for countries. And I think this is just in general a very good step in the correct direction. So from here, only praises. Right, well, can't have a too positive lemon cake video, so let's get on to the issues. Oh boy. I don't think their Q18 plays multiplayer. Or if they do play multiplayer, I don't see them in decent lobbies, I'll put it this way. First of all, they managed to import a bug from Gecko. So for those unaware, Gecko is a total rework mod. That's basically a multiplayer focused mod that makes the game a lot more balanced, quote unquote, for multiplayer. Now, it's constantly tweaked, so while achieving true balance is basically impossible, the constant tweaking means the meta is at least pretty constantly shaken up. And there's a bug in Gecko where Gecko, however you wish to call it, so it's going to be the new GIF issue. It's GIF, by the way. Anyway, there is a bug in Gecko where if you press the dev button, you can sometimes double dev once. They managed to import it into the base game, which is impressive. I am impressed how they managed to do that. So now, the bad. Well, again, now I need to address one big thing. Many of the issues I highlight here are things that if you don't abuse them as a player, the AI certainly won't. And what do I mean by this? Well, there was a notoriously terrible update for EU4, on release anyway, called Leviathan. And in that update, if you were a player, it was ridiculously easy to get loads of Imperial Authority by going to the oh god, I've just forgot the name of the Greater Yugoslavia area, going to places like Wallachia, going to random bits of France that would fell out of there somewhere, just going to random like Livonian Order, going to Riga, going to the Teutons, and going, hey, you want to join the Empire, kids? And then go, you know what? Yeah, sure. And you'd get +5 Imperial Authority, which means that by around 1480, 1470, if you were doing this casually, you could easily revoke. If you were speedrunning it, you could be doing this by 1460. It's incredibly broken, to the point of sheer absurdity of how powerful that feature is if you're a player. Now I hear you say, well, just if you don't like it, don't use it. But it impacts the game in a ridiculous way because the AI will use it. If you are playing a game as the Ottomans, let's say you're a new person trying to learn the game as the Ottomans, or you're a person trying to do One Face, so you're playing the Ottomans, again, I don't judge. You go to declare war on Serbia. Now, I am tagged into Poland right now, so, you know, I still have no CB, but you will have a claim as the Ottomans. You'd normally fabricate it, blah, blah, blah. And that will be fine, because Serbia usually has around 3 allies who, in their greatest strengths, are sometimes called Wallachia. However, what would happen is Serbia would join the Holy Roman Empire. And this is not intentional. I hope not anyway. Well, they fixed it, so I know it's not intentional. But this would have terrible impacts on your game. So even if you're not abusing that quote-unquote broken thing, it would still affect you. And I think this is actually a part where we now segue back to the current DLC in hand, the Alliance in the North, that most of my concerns about the changing government reforms, the completely broken national ideas and so on, are actually relatively hard for the AI to properly use. For the most part, my greatest concerns is how they've been overly generous in some modifiers, and there's definitely been a great amount of, as it were, inflation in how strong the country modifiers are. Let's not forget at one point that Coptic was the strongest religion because it was the only religion that had custom mechanics, and nowadays Coptic is universally laughed as the worst religion, well, by most people anyway. There has been a great amount of inflation in terms of just how powerful certain modifiers in the game are, and this has continued in this update to a really strong extent. If you do Poland properly, you can get your Winter Sars to take minus 50% morale damage and have +2 fire. That is ridiculously strong. That is absurdly strong. +2 fire applies to both the defensive and offensive phase, so that is an extra 4 pips in the fire phase on your cavalry, which is already an issue for a country like Poland, that notoriously is incredibly strong with their cavalry. If you form Scandinavia, you get +1 global building slots. To call that a modifier overpowered is an understatement. That is ridiculously strong, which it means that wasteland provinces like this, you now have both a manufactory and a workshop at no exterior monarch point cost, which is insane from an economic perspective. And that's just really stroking the surface. There are quite a few ridiculously powerful things that have been added as modifiers to this game. Not beginning with, and not limited to, government reforms. Now, there's quite a few government reforms, quite a few unique ones, and grant, they are quite interesting. But the issue is with adding more reforms is, as much as you only add a modifier that gives a couple percentage points, you end up being able to stack them. You end up being able to stack the modifiers, and that's when the issues start to arise. There was a major concern at Paradox, according to their dev diaries anyway, to nerf the dev meta, as it were. Instead, they've actually buffed it, I would argue. Sure, you don't go quantity economic, and if you want to do the dev meta, mindlessly it's a bit harder now. But, as a demonstration, and actually Poland's a bad example because they're locked into Sedge. But let's go to Sweden. And let's take a look at our government reforms. Actually, I think Sweden's also a bad example. We're going to need to take Great Denmark because we might need to be independent. Oops. That's... Is it done? It's done. Okay. Excellent. So... to just demonstrate, theocracies were already notoriously known for being ridiculously strong. However, they are now even worse. So if we can quickly reform our way towards insolvency granting government, we'll need a bunch of admin for this. Now, again, this is something that while you're playing the game you can't just do. I cannot spell, however. Let us quickly switch to a theocracy and demonstrate the main issues. So, let's begin with naval trolling. Theocracies with mission on the high seas used to be quite surprisingly effective with multiplayer naval trolling. It was a relatively trivial investment. You didn't need to forfeit any of your quality on quality builds to get it. At most, you're giving up 15%, 10% now manpower here. But with mission on the high seas, you get quite a few substantial naval buffs, which would be fine if it wasn't for the fact that the new expansions here give more naval buffs. Oh Christ alive. Naval Leader Fire Pip, 15% morale of navies, on top of the current naval buffs to theocracies. It's quite strong, and I think the stacking potential is something that really should be addressed. The worst part is that thematically addressing it is a bad idea. If you are wanting to play a naval theocracy, as cursed as that sounds, you'd probably want to go and pick up the Lords of the Sea here. But they really need to think about what they're doing in terms of the modifier stacking. Because this is actually the least egregious example. The most egregious example is the fact that they tried to address the dev cost meta. So, theocracies were already good because they had access to the expulsion of heathens versus the combat heresy thing. They've both been buffed. Now, instead of plus 10% morale, it gives 10% morale and an extra 5% shock damage. But the expulsion of heathen also now includes some culture conversion costs, because we all know that 5% dev cost wasn't already quite strong. But, of course, they're here to address the dev cost matter, so surely they made deving harder. No, they haven't. The finisher. This absolute joke known as divinity through craftsmanship. Not only does it give a massive 10% goods produced, bear in mind that Britain, to demonstrate their massive industrial capacity, gets 20, so, of course, you can pray half of the British Industrial Revolution. That's honestly an awful joke, but that's what this modifier tells me. It also gives development cost modifier 2.5%. Now, this isn't dev cost. This is a development cost modifier. This affects the base development cost of your provinces. Hint, this is really strong. This is really strong. I don't know how they got this through testing, because as pathetic as 2.5% can seem, this is ridiculously powerful. Furthermore, the general amount of buffs you can get from existence, as it were, is ridiculous. Because to have to compete with each other, to compete with things like minus 25, minus 2.5 dev cost, if you're doing a single campaign here, there is a 2.5% admin efficiency and minus 5 minimum autonomy in territories from priestly autonomy. That if you are doing a trade company world conquest run or something, it's insanely strong. But I actually don't think that's the best spec here. Wait until you realize the full effect of doing a world conquest and you get plus 50% religious unity from a government reform. Theocracies, if they go humanist, the much more broken thing for multiplayer, ironically enough, is actually none of this. This is all very bad, but fine. The more broken stuff happens now that governing cap is cosmetic. Because you see, I will need to give myself some cash to open the buildings menu. And there we go. Courthouses now don't cost a building slot. So when you are an MP and you are running infinite money, as it were, because you built up your country too much, you can get free courthouses everywhere, given minus 25% province governing cost. Neither do state houses. But I hear you say, lemon cake, they use up a manufactory slot. Well, with governing cost no longer really an issue, this is basically a free button press. And my brother in Christ, that is really strong. The modifier list on here, from possible number of buildings and manufacturers alone, is insane. And that's ignoring the 5% in basically every other economic modifier on that list. It's objectively ridiculous to what points you can push your country in this current patch. And I'm actually going to go on a limb here that despite all of the things in theocracy, despite all of the other modifiers, republics got a ridiculous buff to the point of absurdity, because republics now can maintain almost 100% republican tradition constantly while re-electing the same person. So again, before I get into this, and before I seem too angry, I'd like to point out that it doesn't actually affect, I would wager to guess, 75% at a minimum of the player base. Because 75% of the minimum of the player base are not going to abuse these mechanics to their fullest extent. And again, this isn't said as an insult. This is just how people play the game. But, with that disclaimer out the way, oh boy. So as a republic, you can go down republicanism for 0.2 year republican tradition. This is quite a strong choice for maintaining a good republican tradition. But it gets better, because of course, you can go for a... What's that one actually? One second, I'm trying to find it. Ah, there we go. The military principle, I remember this. Military principle, giving you some max absolutism and years of separatism, sure. But winning wars now gives 5 republican traditions. Separate pieces thankfully do not count this one or that one. But if you're in some area like the HRE, you can just farm a republican tradition by beating up random OPMs and maintaining 100% republican tradition. You already, as a tryhard, would declare random wars on your rivals to humiliate them and show strength for monarch points. In the Empire, you fight a ridiculous amount, and guess where most republics are located? Hint, it's an institution that begins with an H and ends in Holy Roman Empire. Yeah. There's a lot of fighting you do in here without taking much land due to AE constraints and truce judgment. And this mechanic here means that if you're doing it properly and winning all the wars, which you would be, you're going to be ranking up insane amount of Republican tradition. But that's not it. It turns out there's more buffs to Republican tradition. Because what you can also do is, under consolidation of power, is you can, not the new mem, I think it's, which one is it? Might not be actually here. 1 second. I'm not that enlightened with how the, there we go, supremacy of the diet. I'm not too enlightened on locations of all the new reforms. Supremacy of the diet means that coin a diet no longer increases influence, which already is really strong, because that allows you to farm loyalty from your estates without increasing influence from it, which again is just really strong. But coin a diet now gives you 2 Republican tradition, which actually scales the length of your election term. That is really strong. Effectively, it works out to around 0.2 year Republican tradition again, which, may I remind you, is already stacking with Republicanism, which you're probably taking here. There are quite a few new sources of Republican tradition, and of course, being a republic, you retain things like the citizenry thing for morale, you retain manpower buffs from landholders, you retain a lot of just good stuff. You retain a lot of strong mechanics from before, even have access to some new ones for the 0.5 yearly army tradition here. And at the same time, I don't think a lot of people have realized the consequences of allowing these modifiers to stack. This has unironically led to a very weird situation where you've increased the skill ceiling, where players who will know how to abuse these mechanics are going to abuse them to the point where an old player, sure, they won't be able to do great, but they can at least dream of competing, now are going to be completely thrown out of the water even more than before. But at the end of the day, I will hold on with the main reservation. These buffs are mainly constrained to people who are going to abuse them. From my experience, while the AI certainly plays a lot better on this patch, and this is actually another thing I should be giving Paradox credit for, they have improved the AI in a very interesting manner. I found the AI is actually more aggressive now, which is a good thing for the AI because since they expand earlier, they build up stronger countries for you to compete with. The AI isn't inherently going to be declaring 50 wars in the HRE to farm the Balkan tradition. That's just not how the AI works. The average player isn't too affected by things like this. But for the people that are playing competitive multiplayer, we're either going to have to start banning half the content, or we're going to just accept that everyone's country is going to be completely broken. And it's just going to be a competition of whose country gets more broken. Because what it's going to come down to is you're going to have Polish Wind Hussar units that take minus 50% morale damage and have plus 2 cavalry fire. That will be fighting a tag like Afghanistan, which is going to be able to fully refuel all of their professionalism and gain 20 years of manpower for 500 mil. Now, in multiplayer, when you build up your country, you can normally be making around 12 to 13 mil power points a month. And at 5 mil in general, that means for every 2 months, you can use your 2 mil points to get a year's worth of manpower. The reference to hurting the manpower better is just incorrect, and that is one thing which has to be the constraints here. They have tried to nerf a lot of the multiplayer issues, and I have to commend them for the attempt, but in my current understanding, they have failed. Anyway, let's end on a positive note. Compared to the previous updates, this is a massive step in the right direction, and it's still pretty playable. Would I recommend buying this? Yes. There are quite a few interesting runs you can do as Teutons alone. I would not be the person doing them. There's been other YouTubers who have done much better jobs of going over the individual countries if you would like to take any spoilers. Poland is ridiculously strong in itself. Not only does it have access to Wind Hussars that can take minus 50% morale damage and do plus 2 land fire if you go through their setup, as it were. Their new mission tree gives them things like a personal union of Hungary by the 1480s if you do it properly, and plus 10% mill tactics by the end. A brand new modifier that's just completely broken in my opinion. Regardless of that, it's fun. There's new things to do. There's a lot of new content. You want to play something unique for the, if you're already a more experienced player, Riga Gotland offers an interesting challenge while, it still exists. Sweden's a lot more playable now, the new mission tree, and the copper mine now being quite buffed. This is an insanely strong plus 9 goods produced, by the way. That is obscene. But, yeah. For the record, plus 9 goods produced is 45 production development. Yeah. Because each point of production development gives you... There we go. So, base production 0.2. So, yeah, you need 5 production development per point. So, it's 45 a base production from just building a copper mine. And you have missions that upgrade this for you. So... yeah. Very strong stuff. Very powerful stuff. Insane countries you can build. And honestly quite fun. I can genuinely recommend actually getting this update on release. And I will still continue to hope that Paradox will patch out a lot of the overpowered stuff like 50% national tax and a lot of the ways these modify stacks in the coming updates. They've been surprisingly good at that for their current track record. But that does conclude the rant and review of 1.34 by yours truly, the Lemon Cake. Thank you very much for watching. I will show myself at the end, so I'd appreciate a like and sub. But that'll be that, and I will see you when I see you.